everyone! Oh, wait. We've done this before. I'm making a bulb lawn, or rather a bulb septic mound. Let's try this again. I'm making a bigger bulb lawn. Yes, it's true. Last year I made a bulb lawn, AKA the bulb mound, because I did it on my septic mound. And I loved it so much that this year I'm making it bigger. So last year when I planted the bulb mound, I was hopeful that it would turn out good. But I also know that sometimes I have done projects that I go into with the best of intentions, and sometimes they don't work out exactly how I planned. In this case, what happened after I planted that turned out better than I even imagined it would. I absolutely loved the bulb mound last year, which you'll know because every time something new was blooming, I was updating it in videos and on Instagram, and it was just so good. And from the first moment that I found a snowdrop blooming in February, which is, I think it was February 6th, the earliest I have ever seen a bulb bloom in my yard. It was a mild winter, so I'm sure that had something to do with it. And then things just kept coming, and it was snowdrops and winter aconites, and then it was Grecian windflowers and irises and early snow glories, and it was just one thing after another, and it was so beautiful. And it wasn't just me who appreciated it. Almost every neighbor who drove by was like, oh my gosh, it looks so good over there. And if I had one big concern last year, it was how was this gonna look once the grass started growing and the bulbs were pretty much done, and I had to leave the bulb foliage standing so I could build up energy in those bulbs to bloom in the future. And it turned out to be like a nothing burger. In fact, I could have actually just left that foliage stand for a little bit longer, but I looked at it, I'm like, everything here is yellow, and that's all you have to do with the bulb foliage is wait until it yellows. And I'm like, we can mow, so we're clear to mow. And now, since then, it's just looked like a regular boring mound. Honestly, the one thing this pointed out to me is that septic mounds are incredibly boring and ugly when there's not something amazing happening on them, like a bulb lawn. So if you aren't familiar with the concept of a bulb lawn, this is an idea that dates back centuries. And the idea is that you pop a few bulbs in a lawn, or you could do it in your garden somewhere, and you sort of mass plant them in this area and let them just come up. Now, I think this is best done with a variety of bulbs that bloom over a long period of time, although I've selected these bulbs to all be very early bloomers because, as I said, one of the things you have to do with bulbs is, of course, let the foliage stand so that they will have enough energy to grow the following year. So, of course, we like to mow the lawn here eventually, so the lawn will grow up around them. We also pick bulbs that have really inconspicuous foliage. So rather than a big strappy daffodil foliage that's around for a long time, this foliage kind of just blends in with the lawn or the grass until you're able to mow it. In particular, these bulbs that are selected for this generally are really good naturalizers, because the idea is that you plant this once, or in my case, twice to expand it, and then it just takes care of itself from there. So the bulbs themselves will naturally multiply, but also they will seed around as well. So these are good reseeders and good naturalizers. And then you have these, and there are bulb lawns out there that are hundreds of years old because they just keep perpetuating themselves. Also, this is a really good way to provide some really early food for pollinators, because some of these bulbs are a really good source of food for early pollinators, and there's not a lot around at that time. I also personally think this is a really good approach if you like that no-mow May concept. Just have like a no-mow spring. I would hazard to say that this is more beneficial ecologically than just not mowing your lawn for a month, because you're actually planting some food for pollinators. So today's project is to make the bulb lawn bigger. So last year I did much of the top of this, a lot coming down this side, and just a little bit coming down the front and the other side. What it turned out is that I missed that we hadn't planted the other side because there's a really good view of it from our house. So I wish I had had more on that side, and then we didn't go all the way to the end. So we have been very busy for several hours this morning using an auger to drill many holes in the mound. roughly working off where we think last year's bulbs were. We can kind of remember, and you can kind of tell because the grass does look a little bit different. It didn't grow in super great, which is fine, from where we had planted bulbs last year. So I can kind of tell where they were. So we did our best. We'll find out. Let me show you all the holes we drilled. So we came in along this front side and went a little bit lower. And then we did quite a few more over here on this side. And then we did kind of going all the way over this way. Now, I didn't come too far down the hill here because one of the things that we're expecting these bulbs to do is to reseed. And in time, seeds, I'm assuming, will kind of get washed downhill. Plus, it gets increasingly shady as we go this way because there's a really beautiful beech tree up here. So it does get kind of shady on this part of the mound. So we just sort of angled it up here and drilled, as you can see, just like a ton of holes. And then we came up here. The places where we watered a little bit first made it much easier. We did all through here, came around this side, and then kind of more down here. I think this area, you can see the grass doesn't look great. I think that's where we had some bulbs last year. I did drill a few holes and found a few bulbs, like you can see right here. Some bulbs were damaged, but I've just been popping them back in holes, and I bet you most of them will be fine. It didn't happen in too many places. So this is really the most time-consuming part. And the next step is the bulbs. And this year, we have more bulbs than we did last year, I think. I'll put the total number on the screen because I didn't ever really add them up until I put them into the bins. So the whole idea behind this bulb lawn is to make it look very natural. And there's no way to do a natural planting if you start placing the bulbs with intention, at least in my mind. So for me, the only way to do this is to mix everything up. Now, last year I had fewer bulbs, about 2,000 if I recall, maybe a little bit over that, and everything fit into this tub. I think we have more bulbs than that this year, so I think I'm gonna have to divide it between a box and this tub. So I'm just gonna walk through each variety as I throw them in here. So we start with tennis daffodil, which is just the cutest, great little tiny daffodil that naturalizes really well. So there's 120 in each one of these bags. All right, next up is Muscari, grape hyacinth. This is a blend of them. So this is several different colors that bloom over a longer period of time. Muscari can be a little invasive in some places. I don't find that to be the case here. Okay, then I have dwarf irises. I love these little early blooming dwarf irises in two varieties. This is a blue Jubilee dwarf iris mixture, and then a Leda dwarf iris. Now we have early snow glories, Cyannodoxia. I did not know this one until last year's bulb mound, and they were super fun too. 100 bulbs in each one of these. Turkistanica tulip, some people call these botanical tulips. These are deer resistant. These are small little tulips. They naturalize really well, and they are deer resistant and rabbit resistant, which is obviously key. These are probably the latest blooming of the bulbs, I would say. At least last year, that was my experience. I think they win for prettiest bulb. The bulb that I didn't know I loved until I found out I loved it, which was snowdrops. Last year I had my first bloom in February, and that was just food for the weary winter soul, and so I'm fully in on snowdrop. Also on the super early flowering side of things, we've got Aranthus, and Aranthus is winter aconite. Beautiful, fun little yellow flowers, so charming. Each one of these bags contains 100 of these. I mean, look at how tiny they are. So I kind of wish I had more of these, but there are still, I mean, that would have been the one thing I would have probably added more of to this mix, would be more of those. But fortunately, they reseed quite readily and should spread themselves around. Guinea hen flower, also known as Fritillaria meleagris, which is also known as the snake's head fritillary. They get that really pretty little checkerboard pattern on them. Fritillaria uva vulpis, which is another fritillaria that is really pretty. And then last but not least, 320 anemone blandas, Grecian windflowers that I have been soaking for a few hours. So I guess we could call this bulb mound part 2, and really the steps are the same as they were last year. And I'm not going to skip any of the steps because actually I feel like what we did last year was perfect. The great thing about bulbs is that everything they need to grow is in here. So I usually don't fertilize because I just don't feel like it's a necessary step. However, I did it last year with the thought of it's not gonna hurt. It's my one chance to really get food in there. I really wanted to make sure it got established well. And everything we did last year worked like a charm. So I'm just gonna do it again, and I'm gonna go around and put some fertilizer in these holes. Last year I ended up doing somewhere mostly about 3 bulbs per hole is what I did. Of course, many of these bulbs are quite small. And really the only thing that's got any size to it is the tete-a-tete daffodils. So I hope we'll be okay on that. So the approach I took to planting last year, which like I said, worked out great, that I'm gonna do again this year, is to not worry about all the rules with bulbs. Now, if you were planting an area, a smaller area with a reasonable amount of bulbs, you would make sure that you made every hole exactly the right depth and that you always had the bulbs facing upright. When it comes to a project like this, we're letting a little bit of nature take its course. I do not place these bulbs in each hole. I don't make sure they're facing upright. I grab them at random and I throw them in, and how they land is how they land. So is every bulb gonna grow? No, they are not. But it's sort of a law of averages, and also knowing that bulbs are so resilient, they usually figure themselves out really well. So I really feel like probably we spend too much time worrying about bulbs, which I get if you're working with, you know, a small number of really expensive bulbs or something. But in this case, they just get tossed in and covered up. By the way, I think that's one of the charming parts of a project like this, is that you don't have to be a big rule follower to make a project like this work. The bulbs kind of do all the work for you. All right, all the bulbs are planted. I feel like it took longer than I remember it taking last year. I actually did go through and set a daffodil in each one. They're so much bigger than all the other bulbs that it was a little awkward to kind of roll them in, and they just kept ending up upside down. So I actually just went around and stuck the daffodils in and then kind of filled in with the other smaller bulbs, which is probably a better way to get pretty good even spacing, because of course the daffodils will be the most prominent flower. They're going to be the biggest, brightest flower that's in there, so probably a good idea to do that. So now comes the raking part. So we're going to try to rake all the soil back into the holes. We did get a couple of bags of topsoil just to fill in, because it's funny how when you use an auger, how soil kind of disappears. So I feel like we're a little light on soil, and we could tell that from last year. So the process from here is exactly what we did last year. Once we fill in the soil, we're gonna throw down a little bit of grass seed just to kind of help bring the lawn back a little bit. Then we're gonna water it in really well. That's particularly important this year because it's just very dry. You can tell today it's a beautiful warm day with a very dry wind. So things were dry to begin with, things are even drier now. So we're gonna water the mound really well, not just for the grass seed, but also for the bulbs. And we will probably keep up with watering this if this weather pattern continues. It's good for bulbs to have a little bit of moisture. And like I said, we're just starting at a place of so dry. I will also throw down some animal repellent, granular form of animal repellent, just because the soil has been worked over. And so there's a lot of animals that like to dig in the soil, like squirrels and skunks and I don't know, probably possums, things like that, that will be quite attracted to all the soil that we've disturbed. So I'll put a little bit of that down just so nobody thinks they're gonna take my bulbs and walk away. Everything in here is basically animal resistant, all the bulbs, I mean. So this is just to make sure that they get a chance to actually settle in before something comes and tries to remove it and make it into their, winter meal or something. Do make sure you're following along, because not only is it going to be interesting to see how Bulb Mound Part 2 works out, I'm going to be very interested to see how Bulb Mound Part 1 looks in its second year. How the new stuff works, how the old stuff comes back, and how we did figuring out where we hadn't put bulbs the year before. And a big thank you to flowerbulbs.eu for partnering with me on this video. They don't sell anything. They're just a source of inspiration and education, trying to help people discover and grow bulbs better in their own gardens. I hope this project inspires you. Bulb Mound Part 1 inspired me so much that I made Bulb Mound Part 2. All right, have a great day in your garden. We'll see you soon.